But it was probably here around this area. Exactly where, we did not find the sign saying, this is the stone that David drew into Goliath's head that landed right here. But the valley is, we are in it right now.
To his head. Stone was.
Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Soka in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes Dammim between Soka and Ezekah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with the valley between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for the battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistines said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time he was very old. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep in Bethlehem. 40 days the Philistines came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. Now Jesse said to his son David, "Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are, and bring back some assurance from them. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines." Early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd, loaded up, and set out, as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. David left his stakes with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brother how they were. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. Now the Israelites had been saying, Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel. David asked the men standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, "This is what will be done for the man who kills him." When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness?" I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch this battle. Now what have I done? Said David. Can't I even speak? He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter. And the men answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around, because he was not used to them. "I cannot go in these," he said to Saul, "because I am not used to them." So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and, with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistines cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran over and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the sheath. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned around and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the Shaaraim road to Gath and Ekron. When the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. David took the Philistine's head and brought it to Jerusalem. He put the Philistines' weapons in his own tent. Okay, family, I think just a couple of reflections for us. I mean, I think we've all heard the story of David and Goliath, and it's a very, very powerful story. When I was reading and just kind of praying about what God might have for us, there's a couple thoughts that I just wanted to share that can be drawn out of this story. The first is David's season of private preparation. Before he ever got to this heroic battle with Goliath, he was a shepherd, and he was fighting giants already. He was fighting lions, he was fighting bears, and he was protecting his sheep. I find that before we have a public victory, there's always a private preparation that God takes us through. That those times of fasting aren't for anything, those times of prayer aren't for anything, and we might think that gets repetitious, but God gives us the equipment that we're going to need for a battle that we may not have faced yet. And so David had the time and spent some private time in preparation. The second is, I think it's interesting that Saul tried to put on Saul's armor, Saul's clothes. And I just recognize that there's some battles that you fight that you can't win with somebody else's stuff. You've got to have what God has given you. You can't swing the revelation of somebody else. You've got to swing what God gave you. You can't put on the tunic or the clothes. You can't put on the weapons that somebody else has had. But put on the weapons that you've learned, the oil that's been pressed out of you in times of battle. The third is very interesting. I find that it's interesting that the victory took place in the valley. Oftentimes we look at the valley in our lives and we look at it as a place of pain or a place of pressure, and we think that the mountaintop experience is the place of victory. But I find it interesting that God gave him victory in the valley. He gave him victory in the places of his struggle. And so I recognize that many of us might be up against different Goliaths, different struggles, different issues, different frustrations in our lives. And we can think about it, oh God, we're going through this valley. And I just want to encourage us that whatever we're up against, we're just on the other side of the greatest victory we've ever experienced in God. That this is a time for us to notch another belt in the kingdom of God. That we can get excited about the fact that, listen, I've been through this before, but it will be a testimony after I come out on the other side that victory took place in the valley. It took place in the time of testing. And the fourth thought is just the fact that David had a history of being overlooked. If you look at his story back when when Samuel was trying to anoint the next king, and he asked for the brothers, and Jesse brought out all of them, and forgot David in the field, and he was overlooked. And when he got to the Valley of Elah, and they were looking for a warrior, David was overlooked again by his brothers, saying, "What are you doing out here?" When he got to the enemy, the Philistine giant Goliath overlooked him and said, "Have you brought about a little boy to fight me?" And I find it interesting that there is still power in being overlooked, because while you're overlooked by sometimes family, while you're overlooked by sometimes this issue or this person, you're also overlooked by the enemy. And the Lord can strategically place you to get close enough to kill what you've been struggling with as you've been overlooked. And so I find that those times in which you might be passed over or picked over, you can still be getting drawn closer and closer to victory, even in the midst of what seems like rejection. So there it is, man.
Thank you, man. Yeah.